Hello and good morning or good afternoon, John. Glad to see you here.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, we could go ahead and get started. It is right at noon. I want to welcome everyone to the event that we have planned today with John Eels. And my name's Aurora Geis, and I'm currently acting as the past president of ICF San Antonio. It's been a pleasure to serve the chapter almost 7 years in just working with them, and it's just been a pleasure to really advance coaching. And John, we're really excited to have you here today because you're going to be talking about the new credentialing process, which is still new to many people. So we're really looking forward to hearing more from you. A couple of quick announcements that we have for you all before we get started. Just want to share with you all that the session is going to be recorded. We will be posting it on our YouTube channel. And if you, and we'll be sending a link out to everyone that is attending today. Just for the Texas chapter members, we wanted to let you all know that we still have, you have an opportunity to join any of the Texas chapters. And when you do, you get access to all of the events from the different Texas chapters. We have an agreement with our sister chapters, with the exception of social events. Those are a little bit different. So we really encourage you to be a member. And for those of you who are interested, we do have mastermind groups that are set up. If you're interested to join one, just put your phone on the QR code and you'll be sent off to a mastermind group. You can join a mastermind group. And finally, I'd like to introduce John Eels. And John, I'd like for you to just share a little bit about your journey and what we're going to be covering today. We're very excited that you're here to prepare us for the ICF credentialing exam. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Sure, yeah, happy to be here. I'm going to try and share some slides because there's a bunch of data in there. I'll do that in a moment. But essentially, I'd like this to be a conversation. We are a pretty good size, so I think we've actually got space to not have to use chat, and you can unmute yourself and ask some questions. So I'd rather it was a conversation, and I'm happy to take questions or just something that comes to mind as we go through the conversation. I'm going to go through the slides fairly quickly. You will get a copy of the slides. If I go too quick because of my accent, then just slow me down, throw something at me, do whatever you need to do. As part of the conversation, we're also going to take one of the ICF sample questions and do a demonstration. So Aurora, hopefully you'll be my guinea pig to be able to help me. And anyone else who wants to jump in and give a comment, then that's perfectly fine. As I say, you will get a copy of the slides. So hopefully I can share my screen.
John, if you can't, let me know. I may have to do it for you. Well, actually, no, you should be able to. Yes.
Okay, let me just try. Hang on 1 second. Bear with me. I do love modern technology. So much more fun being in a room where you can get it wrong credibly. Okay, let's try this now. And let me ask you if you happen to see that. I'm hoping.
Great.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. So, welcome to a webinar again to prepare for, I'm going to say the new credentialing exam, but as Aurora said, it's been around a while. I think it's August actually it's August the year before. Goodness me. As I say, we can ask questions as you go through. I'm happy to give you my best answer. Hopefully it'll be right, but it will certainly give you a view. It is about preparing for the exam. We're also going to do a demonstration of a scenario, and there's also some options if you want to continue your preparation. Just for clarity, this webinar relates to the preparation for your exam. So there's a whole bunch of steps before that you're probably aware of to actually get to that point of getting your exam. And I would suggest you refer to your own particular school or the ICF website on how to pursue that. Let's see if we can go forward a slide. Okay, so as said, you've already seen my picture. So my name is John Eels. I lead a people practice specializing in executive leadership and career coaching. consult on culture and high-performing teams and leadership, and also train on ethics, leadership. And also I've got this new program, well, actually it's not so new anymore, that supports preparation for the exam. As you can hear, I'm originally from the UK, now in New York City. Relevant to this chapter, I actually lived in Dallas for 8 years, so I do have somewhat of a soft spot for Texas and everything that it offers. So happy to be here and help you along your journey. In terms of what you'll learn today, so you'll learn about the changes to the ICF exam compared to the old. Couple of options to take it, and also about getting your results. And we're going to do a live example with Aurora for one of the exam scenarios, and we're going to do it at study speed, which is really more like a slow motion, a conversation about it, rather than the speed you'd have to do it in the actual exam. Also going to take you through some of the methods that we incorporate in the exam preparation program. So kicking off, it's really what to think about when you're taking this exam. So think about what's in your kind of your brain, your heart, your kind of feeling when you're coming up against an exam. I'll give you an idea of maybe my story. So I trained as a coach in 2015. I trained under EMCC, so a European model, not the ICF. I was within an organization, so I didn't have an exam to pass. So life was a little easier. In 2021, I went through my ICF training. In August 2022, passed out from that, trained. I got my 100 hours and then went for my ACC, but the timing was mildly perfect in terms of I just missed the old CKA, so I had to take the new exam. I'd not taken an exam in some time, actually a long time, and I needed to understand what changed and kind of make my own plan and work out how I was going to approach it. So I studied hard for a month. I built approaches, I tried assumptions, I looked at the old CKA exam and remade them with the new style of best and worst. I also looked at some of my own experience and created some scenarios and options. And eventually I took the exam in person and I was fortunate to pass. At that time, it was a pass-fail. There wasn't a mark number, but that's now changed. Well, you do actually get a number against a pass mark, and I think that's helpful. Now, looking forward, you're all facing the prospect of the exam. You have some familiar feelings from previous exams and maybe something new that you don't know about the exam. So the idea is to maybe dispel some of those myths and give you some tools and techniques about how you can approach it. Okay. Essentially, the ICF sets a standard for the interpretation of coaching based on 4 references: their definition of coaching, the core competencies and PCC markers, code of ethics, and then also the interpretive statements of the code of ethics. So that, if anything, is your basis for any kind of revision and study that you would definitely start with. This knowledge and the ability is tested in the form of an exam. Obviously, we know for credentialing, it's not just the exam. You have recordings, transcripts, training, mentoring, and that gets you to pass as a standard. And obviously, you then come out of that and hopefully realize that to become a great coach. In August 2022, there are a set of changes, and I'm going to share them to kind of contrast the difference. So on the left column, you can see the format for the former ICF exam, which was referred to as the Coach Knowledge Assessment, or the CKA in abbreviated form. To the right is the new ICF credentialing exam, which became active on August 2nd, 2022. It was a long time ago now. And then below, you'll see the changes, and I framed them into one picture for clarity and understanding. One thing I would say is that this is guidance and not reference. I would say check the ICF exam if anything has changed, because from the time when we start doing this, things have changed, and you kind of have to just take that as the gospel of exactly what's going on at the moment. When I took the exam, it was all the way through. There's now a break halfway, which is great. You get a glass of water and maybe an opportunity to go to the restroom, but it does change the strategy. It makes it into a 2-exam strategy, because essentially when you get to that halfway point, whatever you've done in that time, you can't go back. So it is definitely an exam of 2 halves. Historically, you would take the CKA one time to earn the ACC credential, whereas now you take the one exam to support your new credentials achievements. So ACC, a new one, ACC to PCC, or even PCC to MCC. I think that's now potentially changed, because I'm starting to hear that potentially there's another exam that needs to be taken to go towards PCC. So again, check on the ICF website and they'll give you the current flavor of what they're looking for. There are options for taking the exam online in a remote setting as well as in person, and there's an extensive choice of test centers run by Pearson VUE, if you know those. I have a slide on the 2 experiences. Mine was a in-person experience, but I also have a bunch of data on the remote experience. The CKA was open book, whereas the new credentialing exam is closed book, and it's also proctored. And if you kind of interpret proctored as being, they make sure there's nothing in your pockets, there's no electronic devices, they kind of keep an eye on you. They're trying to make sure that you do the right thing at the right time and don't do anything different than they're expecting. And the question volume has been reduced from 155 down to 81, but the pass mark has risen from 70 to 77. The old CKA was looking for the right answer, whereas the new exams looks for both the best answer and the worst answer. And in a way, that's kind of counterintuitive to being an approach. You're always trying to do the right thing rather than just avoid the bad thing. But this is a little different in terms of how to approach these. I'd also say the questions have changed from short and simple multiple choice into some long situational questions with the scenarios of varying complexity. It is rigorously proctored, so there is no reference material that's allowed to be open in front of you. There are no books both in the Pearson View Center and also when you are at home. In terms of the costs, they vary depending on where you are in your certification process. So again, I would say take a look at the ICF website. I do know, although I'm not sure, I know too many people who've done it, there is a fee for a retake if you have to have another go at the exam. Okay, I'll go quickly over this one. So the ICF has defined that the exam, it's all 4 domains in equal measure, and that's consistent with my experience. There are some points to note. So the numbers don't exactly match up, but as a guide for, demonstrates ethical practice, the 13% means you'll get around 10 questions to cover those competencies, markers, and in the case of code of ethics and interpretive statements. You can see the percent and the expected questions in each of these sections. We also found that the language used in the questions and answers can be distracting with lots of words and descriptions. So in a sense, they may have actually put in some things to bring some of the answers closer together and be more subjective rather than objective. So one thing that is challenging is the best may not actually be ideal, but it will be the best of the 4 answers given. Won't be technically perfect, but again, the best of the 4 options, and vice versa with the worst. All the feedback that I've heard, and certainly I don't have an experience, but I did find it difficult, is it's definitely more challenging than the former exam, the CKA. The score range is from 200 to 600, so a 77% pass rate is a score of 460, and you will score for a correct answer. You'll also score for a correct worst answer. What's unhelpful, but it just, I guess, is what it is. You're going to have no feedback on which answers you got right or which answers you got wrong. You're just going to get that pass fail, but you are also going to get a number. So I guess at least you know how much breathing room you got, whether you just got over the line or whether you nailed it and you got everything right. Just quickly, the new ICF credentialing exam continues to evolve. Latest version is a brick wall between sections 1 and 2. And then again, once section 1 time is up, you can't go backwards and review any changes for those previous questions. So again, treat it like 2 exams. You are able to skip questions and mark them for review, and then you can then go back to them within the time allotted. And I'll talk about this as we talk about managing time, because there is I'd say a strategy to make sure you're able to get through the questions and have a little bit of breathing room to go back and deal with the tougher questions. We have heard of variations about how different proctors implement the policies. I'll give you an example of my own experience, which was September 2022. It was the on-site experience. So it was the first exam in years. I didn't know what to expect, but for me, I wanted to get out from home. This was towards the end of COVID, so I needed to be in a different place to have this experience. It took some time to sign in and pass through the process to be ready to start. I would suggest you allow about 30 minutes. I was 45 minutes early, but I prefer to be early rather than late. You are provided, or at this time, you are provided with earplugs, a pack of tissues, a letter-sized whiteboard and a pen. And use it as needed, but don't erase the content because they keep hold of it for some peculiar reason. That board is actually quite useful because you can actually keep a track of maybe the questions that you skipped, so you can keep a running tally of how many you have to go back and look at, which is kind of a useful dashboard when you're trying to manage time. There are other people in the exam room taking other types of exams, so you need to be aware of keyboard clicking, and there was plenty of that when I was there, and other noisy distractions. So I'm fairly sure other people in the room had some kind of COVID-related thing because there were coughs and splutters from everywhere in the room, and it is a distraction. You are allowed out of the exam, but the clock keeps running. So if you need to go to the restroom, you're going to go out, go to the restroom, and it's going to take you maybe 10 minutes to get back into the exam room, and the clock is still ticking. So on that basis, I would suggest that you drink water strategically and visit the restroom before you start, and make sure you've eaten a little of something, not too much, but enough where the blood sugar is in the right place. In terms of the remote experience, so it does require total privacy. They're going to ask you to clear all work surfaces, so you've got a sterile environment. No pens, no notes, no tissues, no pets, no people, devices, or headphones. They'll actually have some tools that you can download just to check to make sure everything is good with your computer, because you're only allowed one monitor, you're only allowed certain applications running. There's going to be a bunch of photos taken of your workspace, and they're going to make sure your cell phone is out of reach. This could be clearly disruptive for anyone with an impressive home environment, maybe has 3 or 4 different monitors and all kinds of wonderful comfort things around them. Certain software is restricted. So again, that system test is really useful just to make sure you're ready and you're not distracted by technical gremlins. I've not heard of too many headaches from that. It's just people being aware that there are those restrictions for remote proctoring to make sure the IT is good. And again, the water and the blood sugar is good, so you can focus clearly on the exam. Hopefully I'm not going too quick. You will get these slides so you can you can scribble your notes on these when you get them. There are several application paths for you to get the exam. Some is training versus the portfolio, and it varies by credential level. Currently, all paths converge at the same exam. However, I've got a slide talking about a change, or rather a pilot of a change that happened in January, and I'm still trying to find out more about it. It's very early, but I sense that there's some different directions taken to maybe have some tiering of exams, which you may appreciate, or maybe you don't. My own experience was taking training at a traditional school, although it was remote. There was the mentor coaching. I recorded an evaluation. It then went to the school to give me the L1 certificate. Unfortunately, I passed. Took me somewhere in the region of 9 months to get my 100 hours because I was working with other activities at the same time. I took the exam. I took a 1 month delay just to do some study because I hadn't taken an exam in years. I then went into the tool to book the exam and then took it in person. Again, look at the website in terms of how to apply for credentials and standards, and they'll give you the flavor of currently what they're asking you to do, but I don't think it's changed too much. In terms of the experience, so, and this is really getting the results, for online, you're going to find those online in maybe a couple of days. Mine was interesting. It was literally walking out of the room and giving a single sheet of paper with a notification letter showing me that I passed the exam. As I say, now you get the numbers on it. And then it took maybe a few hours for the website to refresh and against my name, the credential to show that I'd passed. I think online, maybe it takes 2 or 3 days for the data to get through from Pearson VUE. But again, there's not a hard and fast standard, and there is some variance. I would also say when you apply for the credential, I think they talk about a lead time of somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks if you have your L1 certificate. Mine actually came through in 2 weeks, but I assume they give a range because they have some backlog to work through. So it can vary, but be ready to be offered an exam when you ask for it. You're more likely to get an exam online in terms of availability because obviously that can be proctored for anywhere in the big wide world. Please take care over using the 24-hour clock, because I do know someone that did schedule their exam at 12 o'clock and they were surprised when they missed it because they scheduled at midnight. So do look out for that. There will be some capacity restriction when you look at a Pearson VUE Center because it's not purely for coaching exams. They take all kinds of exams there. So there may be some capacity restrictions. So just choose which one is best for you, both in terms of timing as well as your preferred way of taking the exam. So now we're going to stop talking about it and start doing it and give you an insight into some approaches. We're going to start doing it using one of the 8 sample scenarios provided by the ICF. Outside of that, as part of our own development, we've created a whole bunch of other scenarios that are based on firstly our own experience and kind of dreaming up what the best and the worst could look like. And then we also did some reconfiguration of the C curve to turn them from simple multiple choice into more complex and subjective best and worst. So we made them quite horrible, and that was a lot of fun. So this scenario is available on the ICF website. It's one of 8 scenarios. So one of the essential strategies that makes our approach effective is the systematic way that we process the situational judgment scenarios, as well as the 4 possible actions that the coach could take. The thinking behind figuring out what is the best and the worst answers, and also just building clarity of why it's the best and why it's the worst. So now we're going to go into demonstrate that. We're going to demonstrate it at study speed. It's a slowed down approach, and I'm going to say typically lasts maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, but it's definitely not what's needed in terms of in the exam. So I'm going to put this on the screen, and Aurora, I think you're hopefully still my happy guinea pig to volunteer to take this. I'm going to ask you to read it, and I'm going to do the same at the same time to refresh myself. I've read too many of these. First thing I would say is there's a lot of words, and it's easy to read through this and power read and not quite see it. I'm just going to pause for 30, 40, 50 seconds for you to read it. Aurora, I'm going to use you as the thermometer. When you've read it, I'm going to put up some options. Okay. I think that was a thumbs up. So there are 4 possible things. This is exactly from the ICF website. So Aurora, I'm going to ask you, what do you see? And you can have a guess. What is the best and the worst? And you're on mute just to save any kind of, there you go.
Yes, I was trying to power through the statement and chuckling.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I can let other people read, and also the processing time. I'll be honest. For me, I'm going to call it. I'm a power reader, but frankly, I'm a bit of a reader skipper. So I often need to read things twice, and I found this especially needed in this exam because there are a lot of words, and after you get kind of into maybe 10 questions, you start getting some kind of word blindness, and you have to slow down and just think, what are the words saying? What's the kind of sequence?
Yeah. Okay, so you want the best and worst answer?
Take a first guess. Go with that gut feeling, because sometimes you get a good gut feeling and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, it is kind of tricky and this is because you don't know where the section is, like what frame it's kind of, you don't know what competency, in terms of context. So I'm going to go with 1, acknowledge. Well, no, that's not true. Sorry. Because the end of the statement says some of the emotions they described in their journal. And I would instead ask number 4, ask the client what new awarenesses they developed about themselves through the journaling process. That's my best.
Okay. So the gut is valuable. When you first look at it, don't discard it, but be careful with it, because unfortunately this day and age, there are trick questions in exams. There seems to be someone out there who enjoys putting them in there. But so kind of listen to your gut, but just take a moment just to make sure you're not jumping to judgment. Sometimes the answers look the same. Sometimes it's like, is it this one? Is it that one? You're not going to instinctively know which section, which PCC markers it's looking at, and you don't need to get into that too deeply. It's part of your preparation revision. But in the exam, you don't have to point to markers and say, what is it doing? One thing I would say on that point is going to try and touch all of the sections of the markers. Therefore, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a therapy referral question. So when it happens, when something pops up that says, the client's having a heart attack, that's probably your therapy question, just as a hint. I'm sure they've changed the question since then, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, this isn't fair, because I think I'm having the same kind of heart attack. So,
yeah.
They're also, say again?
John, I was just going to mention something. The very last statement of that paragraph, because when I was powering through reading it, I was also listening to you talk, and I powered through the last sentence. where it says, while the client says little to the coach in the moment, their entries show deep reflections about the anxiety the client experienced at these events and their desire to overcome social anxiety. And so it would definitely, you know, it would definitely be that number one, my gut. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, maybe we can go through them. So one thing is a demo. Let's look at all the questions, because one of the things we did in the study was we tried to work out what was the best and what was the worst. We also tried to rank them. We tried to refer them to the markers. We kind of pushed it all different ways. And the reason we did that is because the first time the team I was working with, we did it, we got a lot of questions wrong. So those 8 questions, we failed dismally, unfortunately, but that was a good learning. So it forced us to do something different. So let's just quickly walk through and look at the answers. So number 1, what would you say about that? Good, bad, and something in between.
Context, John. Good, bad, or something in between.
What does
One
it
being the
do?
best.
What does it not do? Are there any kind of fleas in that question?
Oh, fleas in the question. Number 1 definitely acknowledges the client and the emotions that they're describing. We really don't know how deep their anxiety is or whether or not they need to be sent over to therapy. We don't know.
Okay. I gave a clue in 1 in terms of, whether there's fleas in there. That's a closed question. Are there fleas? Yes or no. There is an if in there. There is a closed question. So it's a kind of a nuance, but it is a distraction, because I don't know about you, but in my training, I kind of developed this trigger to open or close questions, the stack questions, and leading questions. So those kind of 3 things, that was the triple play I always had that trigger open for. So there is an if in there, but it hits on competency 7.4 by asking the client to explore beyond the current thinking. So it's a nice kind of safe question. It's out there, it's leaning forward, it's client-centric. There's just a closed question in there. What about number 2? What do you think of that?
Well, in my MCC training, it really does put the onus on the client for them to learn, for them to summarize, for them to understand. So I could see how this question evokes more shared understanding of where the client is.
Okay. This is someone that's really quite detail driven. They're giving you a lot of information in the question that saying this person is, they're kind of politely OCD about this. They're giving that data and you're asking them to summarize. How would that person feel about that question?
It would probably make them feel more anxious because they are very detailed. And so for them to come up and see the bigger picture, the patterns, maybe it would be, instead of summarize, what patterns, because if they're analytical, they are going to more than likely understand patterns.
Yep. So the client is taking you into the way that they've approached it. So it's definitely client driven. You're asking them to summarize it. And in a way, you're making an interpretation. I would even say you're potentially leading the conversation. You're discounting what's said and you're saying, okay, you have this, summarize it. Now, there could be some questions around, what do you want to do with this information? But that leaves the client with choice. But as soon as you say summarize, I would suggest there's something leading in there that's not really serving the client. Absolutely. Asking someone detail driven to summarize, you're probably going to see some body language that's not going to be comfortable. And in there is the for the coach. And coaching is about the client. It's not for the coach.
So right.
Again,
coach. Yeah.
It's semantics, but these are things that are going to help you kind of differentiate between one question and the other. And there's probably a whole bunch more here. I mean, the fact that you're at MCC, you can probably put 3 or 4 other things in here that are not so wonderful. But we just pulled out a few to demonstrate, if that's okay.
Yeah. No, I'm PCC.
What about number 3?
but
Oh,
taking
PCC. Okay, but
MCC.
you're going for
Taking it.
MCC, are you?
Yeah. No, PCC, but taking MCC courses.
Oh, really? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Hopefully that comes with the fuel of red wine to make that possible.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought this up because again, you're highlighting summarize entries for the coach. Yes, I skipped over that. I was honing in on the keyword summarize, but absolutely no, not for the coach. The
Yep.
summary is more for that shared understanding. So if it said for the client and the coach, then I could understand. Yeah, that would be a good uh, choice. One of the good choices
Mm.
for the coach. No, worse, because it's not about the coach; it's about the client. Yeah.
And I think the summarize is a little bit specific. You could definitely ask a exploratory question saying, there's a lot of information here. What do you want to do with it? How do you want to start to look at it? And they may say, I need to boil it down into maybe 3 key points. And then they're saying they want to summarize it, but again, use the client's language. Don't kind of paraphrase and lead it forward because maybe you've only got 15 minutes left in the session. I mean, who knows? Okay, let's look at number 3.
So I would again say no, that is not the best to identify because there hasn't been um, just additional exploration in terms of, well, what, I mean, that's very broad. Overcome the anxieties. Well, how many are there? Well, which ones are we going to work on? I mean, it was no, not a good answer in my mind. That would come next after more exploration.
Okay, so it's interesting when you talk about next because one thing to consider in some of these answers is you can get some valid responses from a coach, but they could be premature. It's too early in the conversation. And it's like, you know what? We're not ready for that. We haven't done enough discovery if that is the way to go. And he could be diving a little bit deep too early. And in a sense, it's kind of leading to go in that particular direction.
Correct. Agreed.
What else?
I mean, 3 really alludes to um, almost like the exploration of what is high level anxiety for the client and what's low level. It's almost as though there needs to be that exploration of what's most important for them in the moment. So that's why I say that's not a good answer.
Okay. Take a look at that last sentence and kind of look what's behind that. While the client says little to the coach in the moment, their entries show deep reflections about the anxiety the client experienced at these events and their desire to overcome social anxiety. What's in there that is a little difficult?
Perhaps engaging with the coach and being able to communicate how they're feeling.
I'm going to push it a little further. This assumes the client wants to overcome anxieties. Big assumption, because actually what you've got is an interpretation. While the client says little to the coach, their entries show. Okay, who says their entries show? Okay, they may want to overcome the anxieties, but the coach introduced the word anxiety. The client did not. So they're introducing something negative, and it's not the client's language. The entries may show there's an issue with anxiety, but that's the coach interpreting it into a word that they're using, and they're introducing something that's not helpful to the conversation. It's a small nuance. I have no idea if the person in the ICF was thinking about this when they come up with it, but it's something that we picked up on in terms of, hang on a second, that's unhelpful. Okay. What about number 4?
Again,
I
that
promise to
goes
speed
back.
up.
Yeah, that just goes back to after you've set the agenda, you know what the client wants, That to me is more towards the end of the or the middle or the end, but we don't even know what we're working on yet. I mean,
Yeah,
we're working on
so
some of the
closer towards
anxiety,
the
but
end.
it's towards the end.
This is one of those premature nasties. So, exploration is good. When you're asking someone to say more, what else? But in a way, it's kind of a little premature. And in a way, the coach is deciding the topic. So it's leading a little bit. It's talking about something specific that jumps the gun a bit. We're not there yet. Could be a
Yeah.
valid question, but maybe it's in the last half an hour or 20 minutes. Okay.
And that journal may have many pages.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, yep, yep. It could. Um, that took about maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and that wouldn't normally happen. You're not normally having those conversations. From that, I hope that you see that you need to read those questions. And when you've got 81 of them, you start to get tired, but it's worth reading them. My strategy, rather than reading slow, was to read it, take a gut feel, and then go back and process it. So one is kind of like the eat it once and then go back and then savor it. In a way, you kind of have to do that with some of the answers where they start to be close together. So let's take a look at what was the best one. Any questions before we jump into what is the best or the worst? Because there may be some people who fundamentally don't agree and think that Aurora and I have got it totally wrong. Okay. There is no prize for this as well, Aurora. I do apologize.
No worries. It looks like, as reading through the chat, there seems to be agreement that one is the
Good.
best. Now, some people said 3 or 4 being the worst. So, yeah, FYI.
So I think that's great. And the reason I say it is because on the exam, I didn't get a great score. I passed, but clearly I got some things wrong. Certainly in the preparation, we answered some questions wrong. So if you got it right, great. The question is why. The challenge is on these demo questions is the ICF only says which answer is the best or the worst, but it doesn't explain why. So that's where we went in and we tried to study and reverse engineer it. And again, as I say, we got a lot wrong. The key learning is why it's the best and why it's the worst. Over time, we started to improve our thinking and process it to get the right answer consistently, but it took time and effort. And you're just kind of retraining how you absorb and then process these questions. We also consider how to improve the best to be what we consider better than best. So rather than just saying, oh, number one is the best, we thought, how could we make it perfect? What could we add to it to kind of take out some of the fleas and give the perfect coach answer? What was interesting is the discussion and debate improved our knowledge on the competencies and the ethics because we had all of those documents out around us. And at times we would go down to, which marker did it point to? And then we tried to kind of split hairs between that. Again, it was just immersing ourselves in practice and getting used to some of these crazy situations and unraveling them. As I said, we create our own library of scenarios and again, the options against the competencies, and we were able to then test each other and kind of build up that muscle, comfort and confidence about taking the exam. Okay, what do you think the worst was? I think, if I remember, Aurora, it was number 4. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, let's take a look. And again, there's no prizes or penalties. So again, if you got it right, well done. Here we can see it's number 3, and I'll explain, and we can argue about it if it comes to it. So we use the same thinking and learn to ask why it's the worst, and also then we contrasted that by trying to do the best to worst. So looking at number 2 and number 3 in between. In what we've done, it's happening now. It took between 5 and 10 minutes. We could have absolutely kept talking and probably gone on to 15 minutes. Essentially, this is study speed. The reality is with 81 questions in 3 hours, you have about 2.2 minutes per scenario. And if I call it 2 minutes, then that's going to give you a little bit of space for maybe 5 or 6 questions that you want to park. Some of them require multiple reading times and choosing between the responses when they're kind of close in terms of the answers. So there's a lot of word soup, a lot of concentration. So with that kind of that much doubt around, you do need to mark some from review. But what I would say is when you come back to them, it's really tough just to think you can pick up where you come along. So my reality was I had to go back to it and treat it as a fresh question, and in some case read it twice and go back and take another look. The Let's have a look at this one and see what the difference is between them. So number 4, I would say, is, it is leading towards something that's premature, whereas number 3 is more specific. It's actually telling them to identify the next steps. So number 4 is not great. Its fault is that it's premature, but number 3 for me is clearly leading. It's ignoring what's happened. It's jumping forward and saying, okay, so give me the steps you can overcome the anxieties. So you get the double with mentioning anxieties that haven't been mentioned by the client. They're just evident in the material, and they're jumping to what is the next action. They're telling the client what to do. Identify steps to overcome the anxiety. So there's 2 flaws that are within there. You see that? Okay. Wow, it's only 1 question. You'd have another 80. We'd have a long call, wouldn't we? Okay. So in terms of barriers, so my concerns are probably the same as what you're thinking now. New exam, different. I thought it was more difficult than it actually was. I've not taken exams for a long time, and the reality was there was a lack of confidence. In a sense, the exam is unknown. I can't remember the last time I took one, but it was definitely an unknown. Getting the information makes you feel like you know more, and it really kind of reduces some of that concern about the exam. There's a certain reality where there's little or no support. You have a great chapter around you, but many of these coaches are preparing for the exam in a solo environment in isolation without the support of others as a sounding board. This is a kind of an easy one that's normal and natural amongst people. There's a certain amount of performance anxiety. They're not feeling like they're ready to take the exam. And for me, it's always a healthy thing because it keeps me on my toes to try and be ready. And I don't think I'm ever ready to take any exam. Then there's the whole kind of test-taking challenges. So just think about the things you put at the beginning. You don't want to repeat history. You may have had a bad exam and you really want to pass this one. You've worked hard to get to this stage and you need that credential. You need to move on. And then there's always that, you always need more. You don't have everything. But the reality is that, you are, and you do have enough, and you are good enough to head off into the exam. So there is that whole unknown. And with this studying and with this techniques that we use, then essentially you can walk into the exam with a lot more confidence and belief that you will pass. So the obvious thing is we use the systematic approach to prepare to take the exams and pass, and I've demonstrated some of the insights into that. We put some programs around that on the approach and designed how we could take to improve that experience. And so far, the feedback from people have been that the program is very helpful and worked for them. But absolutely, there's no guarantees. I'm going to say there's no shortcuts, really, and it is about hard work. You have everything in front of you to be able to pass. You have the material. You now have some tools and techniques to be able to study, and you have potentially an additional option that I want to talk about now. This is relatively fresh. So I got this from a colleague in January who was approaching ACC, and they were offered a different path. But it is a pilot path, so it doesn't necessarily replace. It's only for 300 pilot participants. So now this is probably about 3 weeks old, this information. I suspect they've already got the participants. But essentially, there's a possibility to take this ACC pilot exam. The nice thing is that you can take it, and if you don't pass, there's no charge to have a second chance and take the regular standard ICF exam. This is how it's different. And some of this I'm using from the material on the ICF website, and some of it is interpretation. So let me point you firstly to the bottom. There's a URL that's going to be in the material that takes you to a lot more information on the ICF website that talks about this pilot exam. I'll give you a mixture of hard information plus interpretation. So it is 100 multiple choice questions. It is 2.5 hours, and there is a 10-minute break in between. So 100 multiple choice. Multiple choice means there is a right answer. There's no wrong answer. And as much as I haven't seen sample questions, I'm going to assume they're going to get away from the word soup and take it back to something a little bit more straightforward in terms of the question and the 4 possible answers. It's a little bit shorter. It's 2.5 hours. Still an exam of 2 halves. There is this 10-minute break that in one sense is useful, but it means you have a strategy of an exam of 2 halves. So you need to be thinking about how many questions do you need to get through in the first half, and then how many questions you need to get through in the second half. And be aware that you're going to be a little faster in the second half. So you need to kind of allow that calculation. You also need to allow a little bit of space to go back on some of those questions that you park. In the first 10 questions, you are going to park some. And don't be spooked by the fact that maybe you park 3 questions in the first 10. You will get better, you will gather speed, you'll gather confidence, such that you won't do that as much as you go through the exam. I suspect, but cannot confirm, that there's no best worst approach. It's the single answer. One thing they do say that I think is helpful and gives some clues is targeted to the expected coaching knowledge at the stage of the career. So the way I interpret that is it's pitched to someone who's doing their first credential. It's not for someone who's approaching a PCC. So I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm just going to say I would expect it's easier. And for me, it feels like they're going back to a similar approach of the knowledge exam, the formal exam. But I am guessing. The nice thing is that this can be a consideration in your timing to take the exam. As I say, the pilot is probably now full, but it's quite possible that later in the year, they're going to make it available as an option. So kind of means there'll be an exam for the PCC and an exam for the ACC, which I don't think is a bad thing. The timing is going to be interesting because it is a pilot. The people will take the exam around now. They're not going to get the results until May, which if you're trying to get your credential, I think would be a little irritating. So as much as you might want an easy route, you're going to have to wait till May to find out if you pass. And if you didn't pass, you've got to take the same exam that you could have taken in January. So all I would say is this sounds like a second half option for people where if you're looking for your ACC, you may have a more friendly path in the second half and you won't have to endure this best or worst answers that we just demonstrated. So that's a guess, but keep your eyes open for it because it may work into the time in your exam strategy. In terms of the exam preparation program, I'm not going to go too deep in here, but essentially it's a 4-part program. There's a whole kind of foundation setup, which is an hour where we connect the team together. Then there's 2 particular workshops where we run through the ICF scenarios, the adapted CKA scenarios, as well as the library of our own one. So essentially you get to go through them live with other people, but then also there's some homework in between and after each of the workshops. And then lastly, we bring all the loose ends together with all the tips and tricks that we've used and then send you forward to go forward for the exam. At the moment, I'm not offering any public classes, so it's very much cohort built. And the cohorts will be a maximum of 6 people. And then if someone has an exam that's kind of approaching now and is going to hit them in the face, then I have an individual program where you could be hot housed within 2 sessions, and 2 hour-and-a-half sessions can get you through the exam. You don't necessarily need this, as I've said already. You've got all the materials. You now have some tips and techniques. You have time to study. I would guess there's probably a lot more information out there to give you some further insights into how to do it, but I hope this helps. Essentially, the program is 1 month, 4 modules. Overall, it's 6 hours, 3 study work groups, potentially. If the cohorts are big enough, there is access to the library, which now is, I think, about 26 scenarios that you can practice on. Very flexible on dates and times, and happy to put together a cohort for Texas if that's useful for any of you. That's pretty much it for now. I'm kind of done a lot of talking. I'm going to take a sip from a glass of water. I've allowed enough time for some Q&A. So let me go to the last slide and be quiet for a moment while I have a glass of water. So Aurora, it's over to you and anyone on the chat. I don't have the chat window open, so if anything comes up there, I appreciate a heads up.
You bet. Well, John, thank you for a great presentation and also walking us through some of the critical thinking that we need to go through as we're answering these questions. Any questions from the audience in terms of where are you? Are you anticipating to take the exam? Are you looking to perhaps continue your study to take the exam? Any questions?
I have a question, Aurora, if that's okay.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. It's very, very useful. And I know I had another meeting I was wrapping up, so I got in here 10 minutes late. But it seems like to me, as long as you know your ICF credentials, like not your credentials, your competencies really well, for the level that you're like, I'm up for PCC. It seems to me that that's really a, good indicator if you're going to pass or fail. Can I get your thoughts on that, John?
You need to know your competencies, PCC markers, your ethics, code of ethics, as well as the ethics interpretive statements. So there's 4 documents you need to lean on. If you know them, or when you know them, you've got a very good foundation to be able to approach the exam. A lot of what's in here is giving you the style of the exam, and specifically preparing you to answer and look for the worst answer, which is very counterintuitive, I would suggest, for a coach. It's also giving you some strategies about how you can maybe look for the best 2 or the worst 2, to rank them 1 to 4. So it's less about the knowledge, it's more about giving you some tools and techniques of how to approach an exam that has some tricks and twists in it, and to not get distracted by them. So to really lean on that knowledge and be able to apply a mindset to be able to navigate an exam, which is testing subjective and objective knowledge, rather than necessarily finding out, are you a good coach? So it's a yes with I'm going to call it like a smart caveat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just if I compare my experience with the ACC exam, I didn't prepare at all. It was all based on my own ethic, my own intuition, my gut, and I passed it the first time. But like you said, it does seem like it's testing a lot more than it did for me the first time.
So for that first time, would that have been the CKA exam, where it was kind of pretty simplistic question and multiple choice, you just need to pick the best one?
Yeah. I think if you have strong ethics in general, and again, your competencies pretty well, then it was fairly easy to get through.
And that one would have been open book, right?
I think so, but I didn't use that. I just
okay.
Went through it just using my own knowledge and gut.
Good for you. Good for you. Yeah, this one is different. It isn't the single sentence and then the 4 and pick the best. As you can see, they are subjective, complex, leading in certain cases. For me, I looked at it was like, this is confusing. And it's intentionally confusing because they're trying to get you to make a subjective judgment between what is the best and the worst. But in a way, they're trying to get you to really read the situation, notice what's happening, act upon it, so acknowledge it, and then take an action that's appropriate in the coaching context. So this is just adding on top the wonderful knowledge you've got from those 4 documents and giving you an exam mindset of how to approach the way that they're choosing to now validate that credential. Hopefully that's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully it's helpful.
No, it definitely helped. Thank you so much.
I do know lots of people that have taken the exam and they did pass. I also know someone who was an ACC going to PCC who was confident they would pass, and they went through the program and they chose not to do any preparation afterwards and they failed. And then I gave them a free refresh session, and they realized, they were very honest with themselves, saying, I was arrogant and I took it for granted that I would pass and I didn't. And they kicked themselves and then they passed. So you do have to study. You don't necessarily need a program, but you do study. And I think if you do the hard work, you have a very good chance of passing for sure. Sorry, there was another question.
Thank you. Just thank you, John. Those scary, Laurie Getz says. Prep program sounds like it could be effective to reduce anxiety. So that's terrific.
And there's also your own study. Just as a suggestion, you're going to get this this presentation that has a lot of information in there. Do your own research and find out, how is that working out for people? Because now the exam is, gosh, it's nearly a year and a half, maybe coming up to 2 years old in the summer. There'll be a lot more information out there that's going to give you insights. And there's nothing wrong if it's out there and it's free. I would definitely subscribe that you need to study those 4 documents. It's very good to be able to know them, but not to the extreme of having to be able to quote marker numbers, but it is a healthy reflection to be able to look and say, okay, which markers does this potentially connect to? That really does kind of train the coaching muscle But fundamentally, go out and study, take the time, put the time aside, understand the current vogue of how the ICF is running the exam, prepare for it, and chances are you'll run it and do great.
John, there are two other questions from Bruce. What is the website URL for the prep course?
I used to run it via Eventbrite. I would say just drop me an email and my information's on there. I kind of industrialized it, and for 6 months we were running public classes all over the place. But I think what happened is people got more used to the exam and they took their own fly at it, and that is really what I'm suggesting is a great way to do it. But if you're interested in it will be a cohort exam if you want to do it for Texas, and if it's individual, you would just contact me. Actually, in both cases, but if someone's interested in bringing a cohort, I'm happy to help. So easy answer, no website. You just contact me and I'll set it up custom for you.
And the second question is the exam timed?
Yeah, it's 3 hours. In the material, it talked about the first 3 minutes is very much about setting the rules for it, and then the rest of it is yours. And then the only inconvenience is there's this little wall in between that you may like or dislike. I didn't have that. I had the full 3-hour experience, but it did give me a chance to manage the time across 3 hours. This is an exam of 2 halves, so it's timed, as in it's 3 hours. There's a wall in between, so therefore it's timed from that perspective. So yes is the easy answer. And John, it is closed book.
Yes, and I've added the links so that you can see on ICF Global's website the structure that John provided as well in terms of the allotted amount of time. And also another question is, can you please share the 4 things we should study again? Competencies, PCC markers, ethics, and...
Hopefully it's in here. I'm not sure if it was in the material or whether I just spoke about it. Okay. Yeah, I think it's on this one. So essentially, look at the ICF definition of coaching, because that's kind of a really kind of simple sentence that should start everything up. You have 2 documents that is your core competencies and PCC markers. They're kind of combined into one. And then you have the Code of Ethics, which we probably know very well, but they've also got their interpretive statements of the Code of Ethics. So that's the kind of the 4 areas: definition of coaching, core competencies and PCC markers, Code of Ethics, and the interpretive statements of the Code of Ethics.
Wonderful.
And also just check the ICF website, make sure they haven't come up with anything new you have to study. They may have some kind of like high jump you need to jump over to be able to get into the exam.
John, another question is, do they have accommodation for disabilities?
I understand they do, yes. I didn't have to test that, but I have heard from, on my own chapter in New York, we had someone from the ICF join, and they will make accommodations for any particular things you need to navigate, but I couldn't be specific about what they are. So I can just say yes and contact the ICF. I'm sure they'll be very helpful and accommodating to whatever you need to overcome.
Wonderful. John, we have 2 minutes to wrap up. I want to check to see if anyone else has any other questions. I have some final remarks or updates, announcements, but any other questions?
Okay. If there's any last questions, by all means, drop me an email. I'll happily help out. And importantly, do your research off the back of the material that will get sent through. I shared the PowerPoint, so hopefully that will give you a good reference to pursue. I don't know how it's distributed, but actually in the chapter we'll do that. Do the study. Be relaxed. Enjoy the preparation for the exam, and I wish you the very best. I look forward to hearing about your ACC, PCC, or even MCC credential. But thanks for the time to listen this afternoon, and I'll hand back to you, Aurora.
Thanks, John. If you could also put your email in the chat, that would be great for our listeners here.
Quickly.
All right. I wanted to just share, sorry, wrong one here. Here we go. Yeah, right here. We do have our February Board of Directors meeting that's coming up on tonight, actually, for those ICF San Antonio members. If you're interested in listening in, we just send an email to contact@icfsa.org, and we'll send you the link. We also have the Qualitarian quiz that's coming up on our events page, and the Quality to Live More Fully on February the 27th. I'm sorry, that's the Qualitarian quiz, a holistic coach trainer series, The Secrets of Creating a Currency of Quality to Live More Fully Now, on February 27th at noon. And then our next event, this is hosted by our sister chapter, ICF Austin, From Adversary to Ally, How to Coach the Inner Critic. And that's on February the 27th. Finally, if you're a member of the ICF chapter, we want to encourage you to download the Wild Apricot app. You'll be able to sign up for any of the events quickly. And you can also have immediate access to all of the coaches that are in our directory. You can just go to the Google app or iTunes store to download the Wild Apricot app. And again, if you follow us on YouTube, this will be posted on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe and a follower, you'll get a notification that it's been added there. And you can also join our follow us on any other social media network. And I actually need to put X on there. I totally forgot. But thank you again for joining. And I'll go ahead and let's see. John added his information in the chat. And we just appreciate each and every one of you, and have a good rest of the week. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Enjoy your afternoon.